Welcome to the Mutual Aid Podcast. I'm Mike Kinman. 1 month ago, Pope Leo released Magnificat Humanitas on safeguarding the human person in the time of artificial intelligence. It happened at a time when the top 10 AI-linked stocks account for roughly 45% of the S&P 500's total market cap. That's the highest single sector concentration since the 1929 pre-crash peak. And the rapid investment and role of AI is increasingly present in public discourse. In the Anglican World, Archbishop of Canterbury, Mullally, earlier this month said to the House of Lords, "God made us creative beings, and AI and wider technologies are a remarkable product of human creativity. They have led to extraordinary discoveries and breakthroughs at speeds that we could have never imagined. But this extraordinary product of human creativity and the power it places in our hands also raises urgent new questions. What are the implications for our human relationships, for our connections with family and friends? How does it impact on our working lives, the existence of or the quality of our jobs? What are the implications for warfare, for climate change, for our engagement with information and democracy? Just because we could create something or deploy technology in a certain way, does that mean we should?" For some, the answer is clearly no. Recently, an Episcopal priest in Massachusetts has been circulating something called the St. Dunstan Pledge. It's a pledge for preachers to keep generative AI out of any part of sermon work, brainstorming, planning, drafting, or writing. And around 150 preachers have signed it so far. Like much of any discourse these days, conversation about artificial intelligence in the church tends to cluster around the poles of fawning and fear. Today's guest, the Reverend Peter Levenstrong, takes a more nuanced approach. Peter is a priest at St. Gregory of Nyssa Episcopal Church in San Francisco, and he co-produces the AI Toolkit, a podcast exploring the intersection of ministry and artificial intelligence. He is also the Tri-Tank Institute's Senior Research Fellow on AI and authors the Substack The Human Part, which advocates for retaining genuine human connection, spiritual labor, and empathy in an increasingly AI-driven world. Peter joins us for a conversation at that intersection of artificial intelligence and the church. And we talk about AI's potential for good, the legitimate concerns surrounding it, and some of the nature of the reactive fear surrounding the rapid growth of artificial intelligence. And no, AI did not write this introduction, but I did find that quote from Archbishop Mullally using it. And now, here's Peter Levenstrong. Peter Levenstrong is with us. Welcome to Mutual Aid, Peter.
Hi, thanks. It's good to be here.
You bet. There's going to start kind of an interesting place. There's a psychological principle you might have heard of called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I don't think I have.
It's a cognitive bias where people who have limited knowledge or competence in a certain area greatly overestimate their expertise. It's kind of the less you know, the more you talk sort of thing. It's basically the working definition of social media. I find it especially
I've come across it in that spectrum.
Yeah. I find it especially true when it comes to people talking about artificial intelligence. In my experience, people look at AI as anything from a glorified search engine to Skynet. And insofar as it's framed as a force of radical transformation, it is either going to catapult us into this utopian future or drag us down into existential ruin. And again, the nature of discourse today kind of tends towards those poles. And truth is usually a lot more nuanced than that. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is, as I've read and listened to you talk about AI, you have given a lot of nuance and thoughtfulness. And so this podcast is called Mutual Aid, and at its core, it's about how do we help each other not just survive, but thrive. And frankly, AI is increasingly something we're living with, and we're going to have to live with more. So I thought you might be able to help us out a little bit here. And I just want to start with the basics. What is your understanding of what artificial intelligence is? So I mean, like, when we talk about AI, what are we talking about?
Sure. typically, when we're talking about AI, we're talking about a specific type of AI called LLMs, or large language models, which have only been a thing in the past several years. This technology became famous with the launch of ChatGPT in November of 2022. And before that, AI has existed in many different forms. I don't know that I don't know too much about other forms of AI, to be honest. Like I've pretty much been focused on thinking about LLMs and how they impact ministry. And I'll just say briefly, the reason LLMs became such an important and transformative technology is actually because the people who were building AIs, they realized, the sort of the existential threat of AI becoming more intelligent and powerful than human beings. And one thing that, sort of shook me as I realized and learned about this is that LLMs were chosen as sort of the vehicle among various options for how to build AI because they are based on human language and they contain human values in the language that they are trained on. And there's a lot of complicated facts about, about how they are trained on books and other things, copyrighted material, and people have a lot of, feelings about that, justifiably so. But I think one of the lesser appreciated aspects of this particular type of AI technology is that it comes with a value set that is much more human than the alternative, which would otherwise be, just maximize your score on this particular, outcome, which could lead to a lot of bad things.
Yeah. Well, so I want to actually get back to the value set in a second. What's your journey with AI? How did you first encounter it, and what really led you to dive into it?
I would say I started seriously thinking about AI around the time everyone else did, as LLMs became really popular. I had taken, some time in undergrad and, 10 years ago, thinking about technology and faith a bit, but nothing too serious. There's a theologian, a Franciscan sister, Ilia Delio, who was a college professor of mine. And
wow, you had her as a professor?
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
it's
lucky
amazing.
You. That's great. Wow.
Right. So she is an amazing, writer and theologian and thinker about all of this.
Yeah.
And she was at Georgetown when I was there in undergrad. And so I got to think about transhumanism and uploading our brains to, some sort of AI back
so
in
talk about what is
2015.
transhumanism.
I would say, if I were to shoot from the hip and describe it, I would say it's the belief that we can become better by becoming less human.
By becoming less human. Okay.
Yeah, by transcending our humanness.
Okay.
In terms of, we can, like, if I'm not sure that transhumanists believe in a soul, but if you can think of a dualistic split between the human body and all its drives and needs or whatever, and the human soul, that we could somehow upload our consciousness into a machine that would be a better vehicle for our essence than what we are currently. And I say that with something of a bit of a mocking, flavor to it, because
right.
I do believe in the God who, was incarnated and showed up as a human being. And so I wouldn't, it's a fascinating thing to think about. It's that's not where I personally lie.
But it led you into a natural sort of conversation about the intersection of technology and faith.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And so So, so as that happened, so this has been going on for, said like since college, at least for you.
Yeah, although I would say there was a long dormant period that then got reactivated when ChatGPT came out, and then my interest in, I guess, consciousness and intelligence and understanding somewhat foreign, non-human intelligences was reactivated with that, and then also paired with what I felt was like an increasing gap, an ever-widening gap between how useful I found this technology to be for myself in my own ministry and the discourse I hear about online and particularly in the church. There's so much fear about this technology, and so I sort of just started sticking my neck out and saying like, hey, we should talk about this, and it's not so bad that we need to completely like not touch it with a 10-foot pole. Like we can actually explore and discern how to faithfully adapt to this emerging technology.
So you're at St. Gregory of Nyssa. I'm going to ask you a real St. Gregory's question, which is the thing that I learned from Donald Shell, who founded it, which is over the years since you started doing this, what have you noticed? What are what are some of the biggest things that you're just like, oh, I'm noticing this is happening?
Yeah, I mean, I'm noticing things constantly, and a framework that I find super helpful when thinking about AI and how it works and how it doesn't work is this idea of the jagged edge of the frontier. Ethan Mollick is a business school professor who writes a lot about AI, and essentially, if you think about a circle, and within the circle are all the tasks that a human can do with a similar amount of effort, all around the circle, and then we kind of come to AI thinking that, from the perspective of our own minds, our own intelligences, it seems natural that, reading or writing a newspaper article or an essay would be about as hard as, or way more hard than, say, unloading a dishwasher. But it turns out for AI, it's like completely the opposite. Unloading a dishwasher is way harder. And so there's constantly these moments when you realize like, oh wait, it's good at this thing, and that's really hard for me, and I can just have the AI do it. Or it's terrible at this thing, and I feel like this shouldn't be that hard, but for some reason it is. And so there's like I would say a million tiny noticings, but if I were to try to group them together, that's a really helpful framework for me as I organize my thoughts around AI.
So you talked before, when you talk about large language models, and one of the things about them is they have a human value set, that you said. And where that led me is like, well, like there's lots of human value sets out there. And so when you say that artificial intelligence, that these large language models have a human value set, like talk more about like, what does that mean to have a human value set? And like there's a lot of human value sets. I mean, is there a value set that is human that is different than different human beings having different values?
Yeah, I think for one, it's fair to criticize the value sets that these AIs are coming up with as being very Western, and because the internet, basically, if they're trained on the internet and the things that are available on the internet or things that are available in books, they're going to have a bias towards the acronym that spells out weird. It's Western, educated, and some other things. I'm forgetting what it
right,
is.
Yeah.
They're going to have that a bias towards that value set. Now, Anthropic, I know a little bit more about Anthropic than other companies, but I know I've heard from them as they've talked about how they approached this, and they've been, and part of this is because I know some Anthropic people, but also partly because they've been more open and transparent about what their goals are with their constitution that they've put out publicly and so forth. But they talk about how they want Claude to be something of a like a good traveler into any culture or context that it shows up in. Just as there you can be, I think of, this is maybe a deep cut, but there's this book called like The Ugly American about the like all the
Right. Oh yeah.
terrible ways that Americans show up in foreign cultures, and this is like the attempt is to be the opposite, is to be like a based in its own biases that it's going to have. No matter what, it's going to have some biases, but to be a respectful, friendly, good traveler when it shows up in other places, and then trying to figure out how to navigate that line of like, here are the boundaries I set, I'm not going to cross beyond this, versus, oh yeah, well here, because I'm not at home, I would do this other thing. Obviously, I don't believe that there's enough evidence to believe that these LLMs have anything like consciousness, but often I use metaphorical language to talk about it because they are responding and acting and spitting out language in ways that mimic human action. So if I sound like I'm ascribing personhood, I'm only doing so metaphorically.
Well, and that actually sort of leads to some of the fear that you talked about is, like as when the topic of AI comes up, it feels to me that there's several sort of major arenas of fear, and one of them involves sort of, I kind of call it the Cylon question. At what point will AI become sentient, and then what will distinguish it from humanity?
Right.
But then there's also some other things. Is AI replacing human creativity? I walked picket lines with people from the Writers Guild several years ago here in Los Angeles, and that was a huge concern of theirs. There's an economic impact of AI. AI is going to eliminate huge numbers of jobs and cause rapid unemployment. That's a fear. There's environmental impact, particularly the energy resources that are taken up by it. The fear that the interaction with AI is going to become a substitute for human interaction, sort of the therapy bot, AI girl, and boyfriend stuff. First of all, am I missing anything, or have I pretty much got all the big areas of fear?
Those are some of the greatest hits for sure.
That's good. Well, so which of these, and it can be more than one, I mean, are there any that you find yourself maybe not afraid, but kind of nervous about, and saying, yeah, there's something here?
Yeah, I mean, I in particular draw a line around the relationship issue.
Okay.
I think, I do not ascribe personhood, like I just said, and I also think that while this technology can be a very powerful tool and product for providing different services, and we can use it in strangely relational ways, I think we need to not allow ourselves to be tricked into thinking this is a relationship and with a real mutuality, because there's nothing there experiencing the other side of the relationship. There's so I will often use LLMs to talk through a situation, and perhaps I wouldn't quite describe it as therapy, but it's something, maybe I would talk through something that might come up in a therapy session, but it's not the same as a real relationship, and so I worry about people who have like AI boyfriends, AI girlfriends, or whatever, and who are telling themselves that that is a real relationship. And I believe that the church definitely has an opportunity to have more of a moral voice here. And I think our voice could have more meaning if it was less sort of a like blanket ban on AI, and instead a more nuanced take of like, no, this you can. It's not the technology that is just absolutely terrible, but there are these particular things that we want to tease out and provide some guidance on. I think pastors and preachers all across the church should be, speaking up and sharing some guidance with people, because people in the church are looking for guidance on that. And the relational piece feels particularly to be one that is unique to this technology and new. The other ones, I mean, I would say there are a number of things that are showing up in new ways. Data centers are a big political issue. There's the copyright infringement, things like that. There are every technology we use, from our phones, which are, using rare earth materials mined in Africa, to our cars, which pollute the air. We are, in so many other ways, we are willing to accept some negative externalities for the usefulness of the tool. The things that, I would love to hear it if this sounds ridiculous to you, but
I'll let you know.
As far as I can tell, like, I've been trying to engage with this and think it through. But like the things that AI is obviously having a uniquely strong backlash more than these other technologies. Why is that? I keep asking myself. Is that, partly I think it's because it's new, and new things are easier to resist, and we're perhaps more, at this point in history, more trained to resist tech than we were when, social media came out, or when cars and phones came out. Although there were backlash, pushback against cars and
absolutely
other forms of technology. And then also partly this is like in terms of the jobs conversation, this is the first wave of automation that is clearly targeting white collar work before blue collar work. And I think we need to be really careful that we are not, reacting to this technology in a more pointed way because of some, classist response,
right,
of
now it's my
this
ox
affects
being
me
bored this time. Right, yeah.
Right. It's not, it's not people in the Congo who are living in terrible, impoverished conditions mining for rare earths. It's me who's affected. Like, I get that very human response, but I do want to interrogate that. So, yeah.
No, that's great. And that's an interesting, because one of the things I keep thinking of, whenever something new comes up, there's generally resistance to most things. I think that's, first of all, there's an opportunity for the church to convene conversation, because at the heart, what we do is we gather around the table and we look each other in the eye, and we lay our humanity on the table with Christ, and we ask God to sort of bless the whole mess of all of us and sort of see what happens. And so, I think there's an opportunity with this to say, okay, yeah, there's potentially ethical issues all over the place. I love the one that you just named. On one level, everything's problematic. My friend Mark Chase says, I order my anti-capitalist books on Amazon. And so it's just like, there's problems with everything. And, is some of our particular resistance to this because it is going to hit home with us as white educated middle class and up Americans in a harder way. And I agree. I think that's something that is really good to look at. It's also sort of it raises a larger issue, and this is probably another conversation for another time, of, well, what do we do with that opposition? And I was in Nashville this last week at the Thistle Farms National Conference, and Father Greg Boyle was speaking, who's the founder of Homeboy and just amazing. Yeah. And he had this great image, and he said, when something is really terrible, there are, broadly speaking, two responses. You can shake your fist or you can roll up your sleeves. And as someone who spent a lot of time shaking his fist, and I believe there are absolutely times to shake your fist, I also sort of wonder, well, what's the piece
You've done a lot of
rolling up our sleeves? And so I actually, I want to get back to that in a minute, sort of like, how do we prepare for this sort of brave new world? And it's sort of an antidote to the fear. I was actually watching The Daily Show a couple months ago, and Jon Stewart had on a guy named Josh Turangel. I don't know if you know him. He wrote a book called AI for Good. No. A really good book. Okay. And one of the things I love that he talks about is he talks about separating the technology from the tech bro. And he said basically separating the developing large language models, AI itself, from some of the, frankly, potentially really scary people who are behind it, funding it, and looking to profit from it. And he dives into some really positive ways. I mean, starting sort of with Operation Warp Speed and the vaccines. That Moderna used AI a lot to try to figure out the vaccine for COVID. And he talks about the Cleveland Clinic, the IRS, there's a public school district in Indiana. I mean, the point is there's good here. And then I also listened recently, you mentioned Anthropic. I listened recently to Ezra Klein interviewing Jack Clark, who's one of the co-founders there.
Sure.
And one of the AI for good things that he talked about, I loved it, he called it schlepping. And he said, like, schlepping is the tedious, time-consuming execution work that surrounds the parts of a job that actually require human judgment and expertise.
Right.
And that's going to lead me into preaching in a bit. I want to get into preaching in a bit.
Sure.
Aside from that, where, as you sort of have this AI lens, as you look around the church and society, where are you seeing AI being used for good? And what do you think about Clark's idea that AI can help us become more creative by having us spend less time schlepping?
Yeah. So creativity is a really, hot topic in AI, and I think it's, depending on how you define creativity, I think it's fair to say that AIs aren't creative because they tend to just, rehash human ideas in different forms and so forth. And but then you could ask, isn't that 99% of what most humans do anyway? I think that's a fair question as well, but whatever. I'm not, decided one way or the other on that particular question. Right. But then there are those glimmers of like truly new ideas where people are, coming up with something that's so different. And they happen to all of us, I think. And we all like realize that like, oh, wow, things could be really different if we did this other thing. But then far and away, like the biggest barrier to, more of that happening is that it takes a lot of work, and you have to like figure out how to implement it and share it with other people and guide people in this process. And none of that is stuff that has never been done before. And so from my own experience with a preaching project, which I don't need to go fully into here, but Living Stories sermons, which you know about, and
talk a little bit about Living Stories, just so people know what it is.
Well, sure. It's essentially collaborative preaching, and it takes a shape of wondering questions and storytelling, but it's really about getting the whole congregation to listen to the Spirit and speak aloud what is being whispered to them in the room, and the whole congregation enters into the preaching moment together. And as preacher, you instead of being the orator, you take on the role of facilitator for the conversation. That's the kernel of it. And I've been writing about that, and there's a book about collaborative sermons coming out in August. My publisher will want me to say that. But
that's okay.
all of this,
at the end, we'll tell people
say,
where to order it.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. All of this, like AI is a great co-founder, like you can have this initial spark of an idea, but then there's so much work to make it happen, and the AI doesn't need to be creative in the like high bar sense of the word of creativity. It can just tell you like, okay, this is how you do some trainings, and this is you have all this other writing you've done about it, and come up with this cold email to this other person, and whatever. It just makes the process run much more smoothly, and it removes the barriers to creativity. If we're being very specific about what we mean about creativity, I'm fine with saying it's not creative, but I do believe quite firmly that it removes the barriers to creativity and sharing that creativity. And I think that's a really great thing that the church could benefit from in this moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you and I are on so much of the same page about this. I was just thinking as you were talking about, well, what is creativity? And sort of the irony is, and I'll talk in a second sort of how I use AI in my preaching. But like I just preached a sermon last Sunday, and like one of the things I do when I'm done with my first draft is I'll go to something like Claude or another AI, and I'll put it in there and I'll say, please summarize this for me, because I want to know, am I really saying what I think I'm saying? And there's been times where it's like, oh, I didn't know I was saying that. I don't want to say that, and that's been really helpful.
Right.
But I did it for this Sunday, just like, and it basically, and I have issues with sort of how sycophantic AI has become sometimes, and I'm just sort of like, okay, like, that's fine. Like, right. It's okay. My sense of self is doing just fine. Thank you very much. But it said, oh, you connected this and did this and did this. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't like, and it was creative. Like I didn't even realize I did that. And so it's actually noticed things. It helped me analyze sort of my own stuff in a different way, which was really, it's a tool. It's like, yeah, let's talk about preaching. And I really like the Substack that you just wrote about this. Recently, there was this Episcopal priest in Massachusetts, Emily Garcia, and she's been circulating something called the St. Dunstan Pledge. And it's a pledge to keep generative AI out of any part of sermon work. And it's like brainstorming, planning, drafting, writing, whatever. And as of when you wrote about it, about 150 preachers had signed it.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with asking you to be kind of devil's advocate for a moment. Because in your Substack, before going into your issues with it, here's what you wrote. You said, I want to say plainly that I admire the people who have signed it, and I respect their thoughtfulness and dedication to their ministries, and yet I won't be signing it myself. I share much of what moves them. I share the conviction that a sermon should never be a polished performance standing in for a pastor's actual presence. Some of this gets into some of the living stories thing. And then you go on to talk about what a sermon actually is. That's a whole different conversation. I'd love to have it because when I read yours, I got like a big case of the sort of the yes ands reading it. You've done a lot of work at this intersection of AI and the church. Can you talk more about where you sympathize with and even find common ground with people who are taking an absolutist stance like this against artificial intelligence?
Sure. I mean, I think the best example I have is just that there are so many bad examples of AI use out there.
Yeah.
And when everybody can think of what it looks like to read AI slop or have AI slop read to you. And nobody wants that in a sermon.
No.
Right. I mean, that would be terrible. And there was someone, this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. Someone mentioned to me in some conversation close to a year ago that AI is kind of like plastic surgery in that you only see the bad use cases, and everything that is a good use case just looks natural, and you don't realize that it was AI.
Particularly impactful for someone living in Southern California. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And so it's like, yeah, we all know what it looks like to read bad AI slop. And yet, for those of us who are using AI in a discerning manner and doing the work that it takes to use the tool in a way that is authentic to the person who is using the tool, making it, their own voice, their own values, their own stories, their own narrative, their own way of, looking at the world and tailored to the congregation that they're working with, there's a lot of value to using it in that way. So I get the fears around that. I guess,
right.
Yeah.
Well, so, and like, sort of for me with preaching, and part of it for me with preaching is, and again, not everyone is this way. I just get so much joy from the creative process of preaching, and it's like, why would I rob myself of that? And so, like, I don't even I have at most reused a piece of an old sermon. Like, I don't even like to do that, and it's not because of some high moral ethical stance. It's like, but it's fun for me, and I want to have fun. And what I like about AI is, and it's actually, I use it quite a bit, and a lot of it's what I would call sort of schlep work. I think like 30 years ago, when I was in seminary, I would have spent so much time poring through books. And even 5 years ago, I would have spent all this time really kind of ham-handedly using search engines. And one of the things I love about using these large language models is I find it just this amazing tool for going down learning rabbit holes that have led me to some really great spaces. Like, I was looking just a couple of months ago, I just sort of was like, it's like, can you give me a quote from a black womanist theologian on healing and community? And I came up with something from this woman named Barbara Holmes, who works with Richard Rohr at the Center for Action and Contemplation. I'd never heard of her. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is great. And I went and did some research. I ordered her book. She's got this amazing book, Crisis Contemplation, Healing the Village. It is helping me think so differently about how communities and other groups heal from trauma. Well, that started with me posing a question to AI. I've told what I did do with my first draft. Like, there's times where I know there's going to be children in the congregation, and this is where I need to learn more about living stories. But like, as an orator at this point, I want to make sure they're walking away from something. So I'll sort of put a paragraph or two in, and I'll say, can you put this in language accessible to a third grader? Which, frankly, tends to be language that's more accessible to everyone. And it gets me... Right. And then I can sort of, with that lens, with a few paragraphs, then I can go over and say, okay, where am I using jargon? Where am I using inaccessible things? And it helps me. So in addition to, and maybe it's just the AI slop piece, where do you feel the fear is around AI and preaching? And like, how do you use AI personally in your preaching preparation?
Yeah, I would say one of the things I hear over and over is that people fear that using this technology means there's no room for the Holy Spirit, which I think I get what they're saying, but it's part of what I was getting at in the piece you read, which is really saying, like, the Spirit is present there in the live event of the sermon, not in your fingertips at the keyboard as you're, like, typing your sermon. Or maybe, I think the Spirit, I would say, sure, the Spirit is present everywhere, but, like, that's not the part that I'm worried about, right?
Right, okay, good.
Like, the Spirit shows up in the sermon, and if we're, like, I don't think that using AI can take away from, like, if you, like, I almost want to ask people, like, wait, are you saying that this technology is more powerful than God? Like, are we worried about God? Do we have to protect God? I don't think so. God is going to show up because God is in all of us, as we're, engaging with Scripture and with each other, and so I'm frankly not scared on the Spirit's behalf. I am.
Amen. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, so there's that, and I just think that we have to be present with our people and show up, and know that we may say something that's not in the manuscript, and because we're led by the Spirit in the moment, and the people are revealing it, and sermons should have surprises in them, essentially, and I think that's where the Spirit shows up most clearly.
Well, and then then there's go ahead. Sorry,
ahead.
Keep going. No, it's like there's.
No,
I mean, it's the Spirit is involved in all pieces of it, and and including, what happens inside someone's heart. Because we've all as preachers, had people come up to us afterwards and either positively or certainly negatively, sort of said like, "Wow, it was amazing to me when you said this," and I'm like, "I didn't say that," but it's what they've heard. And sometimes it's like really powerful and transformational, and you're like, oh, well, thank you, God, for doing that work in that person's heart. And I love that. Like, I think the Spirit's, I think she's got herself covered. I think she's,
I think she, I mean, she shows up uniquely. I would say the Spirit uniquely shows up in the moment of the live event of the sermon. Mm-hmm. I do not think she uniquely shows up in my fingers as I tap on my keyboard, because if that were the case, then the Spirit would not be showing up in the sermon writing process before computers existed, right? Like,
but if you look at the computer as sort of an extension of the pen or whatever, or even, I mean, are you talking about like using the generative AI or typing out the sermon?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if the Spirit can be present in me as I'm engaging conversationally with an AI about my thoughts, then the Spirit is present whether or not each word is entering the Word document because I physically tap them with my fingers, or because, I don't think the Spirit needs me to type it out for the Spirit to be present in the preparation process. And if I'm showing up as a creature of God, who is a creation of God, who is like discerning and trying to listen to the Spirit as I'm engaging in conversation, much in the same way as we do when we're with another person, and this gets to the weird relational piece of it, but it's a one-sided relationship, a parasocial relationship, then the Spirit can be present in me, because I'm a vessel for the Spirit, whether I'm typing things out or not.
Amen. I mean, there's a whole other bunch of conversations to have about sort of the nature of preaching and preaching as a creative process, and it being about community and not just an artifact that's presented, and then also like the spoken word and the heard word is very different than the written word, and I've also, I wasn't at Riverside Church when Dr. King preached his sermon there a year before he died. And yet I've read it so many times, and I can't say that the Spirit hasn't been present with me in reading those words. So it just is. It's so nuanced. But I do think that I don't. I actually, one of the things that I think about, I had a really wonderful rabbi friend of mine, Ken Chasen, here in town, preached an Erev Yom Kippur, a Kol Nidre sermon on AI several years ago, and part of what he believes, and I believe this too, is that nothing will ever replace the human face-to-face. And that if we get drawn far away from this, and I see this happening with younger generations, my kids' age, who are in their 20s, who lost a certain amount of social emotional development to COVID, and who in some ways are as if not more comfortable online than they are face-to-face. we are wired as human beings made in the image of God to need each other in incarnational ways. I don't think we're going to evolve out of that. And so my hope is that most things are pendulum swings, or many things are. That as we swing with social media and artificial intelligence and these other ways of having relationship, we're actually going to get to a place where we become perhaps more aware than we have been in a long time of how much we need each other. That's my hope. And my hope is the church can be there for that. What do you think about that?
I mean, I totally am with you there. I think that the church should be an analog haven for people who are looking for, real face-to-face communion with other people. And digital church is a whole different thing. And I don't want to exclude that, but it's not what I'm focused on. I think there's a real way in which there is a growing humanist movement of wanting to put down our devices and be human together, and I applaud that. And so it's actually like what I really want to protect, even though I'm talking about using AI. I try to encourage people use AI in sort of the background, backstage, when you're preparing, and you can get go down those rabbit holes, as you were saying. You can get such a richer understanding of a certain situation or whatever it is that you're entering, but then to show up as yourself, and be fully present, be fully human. We can, if we keep, nobody wants to see anybody else's AI, and that's why sending someone your AI slop is just a terrible idea, and especially preaching it from the pulpit.
Yeah,
but
it's awful.
But then if we use it to form and inform us with discernment and the right skills around using this tool well, then it can actually lead to a much richer conversation, even if it's just at the level of I'm about to meet this person for the first time, research them and tell me about them. And so then I can just have a better conversation with them because I actually know a bit about who they are much more quickly than, I could do that in 10 minutes as opposed to an hour of using a search engine.
Well, and I have a friend I was having this conversation last week. And he's got a couple books that he's read, Fierce Conversations, Difficult Conversations, how to, handle conflicted conversations. And he was preparing for a conversation with a parishioner that was going to be really difficult. And he sort of put some data into the AI and saying, this is how I want to show up in this conversation. And he practiced on that, and he said it was incredibly helpful. And he said, I felt it helped me be more loving. And I just thought, wow, that anything that could have someone at the end of it say, I felt like it helped me be more loving, that can't be all bad. Yeah. I mean, that's really good. And again, I try to think about things in terms of what is the human impact, and that can be a really good human impact, is because I know there's ways. There's times I don't have a friend around to say, hey, be a practice conversation partner with me. Help me see this. And if it can help me with that, I think that'd be great. And the other thing in terms of human impact is, and gets into some of the other fears we talked about, is, there's huge impacts from AI. And some of it is some of it with the environmental impact and energy impact is similar to blockchain and things like that. But economics, employment, the environment, and I said with Greg Boyle, it's there's virtue in shaking your fist against things that we believe are wrong. I've done that on many occasions. I'm sort of a student of history, and maybe it's me, but I can't name an instance in the past, say 500 years, where a major technological change has been halted because people were worried about its impact on ordinary people. I mean, nuclear power got slowed, GMO foods had some guardrails put on it. But when we're able to do something, there becomes a certain inevitability to it. And so my first thing is, like, how do we talk about, this is something I really feel like we struggle as the church. How do we talk about potential negative impacts in a way that people can hear? And I'll give you an example. At my last congregation, I began to talk about the necessity of having the entire campus converted to solar power. And people loved it when I talked about the cost saving and being more green conscious. But then I made the mistake of saying the quiet part out loud. I said that, well, you know, because of climate change and other factors, we're going to be facing waves of climate refugees in Southern California over the next 20 years. And when the grid collapses, we're going to need to have refrigerators that work so we can feed people. And people freaked out, and like the knives came out. So how can we acknowledge some of the economic factors, environmental factors, things like this that are happening? And how do we talk actively about the real economic and environmental consequences of AI that it seems to me are pretty inevitable without everybody freaking out?
Yeah, it's hard.
I'm not expecting you to have a magic answer, by the way. I sure don't.
What I tried, like, I think there are several different issues inside the environmental issue.
Okay.
The hardest one, I would say, is data centers, because NIMBYism is strong, and I understand nobody wants a data center in their backyard. Like, that's just how it is. And especially like when you get powerful tech companies and then coupled with a NIMBYist reaction, like it seems very likely that more and more data centers are going to end up in communities with less political power to resist, which is a whole, classist, racist issue. And so the ecological issue gets combined with, social issues. And that's just super complicated. And I'm not, I don't know what a good answer is, but I'm with you on the fact that, like, this seems pretty inevitable, and we should be doing everything we can to exert external pressure on the industry, so it's not just a race to the bottom and the bottom line and the benefit of the shareholders, but actually thinking about what is good for society and for people. Other environmental things, I think it can be helpful to just put these in numbers that we're usually not good at knowing what these measurements mean, but for some comparisons can be helpful for just giving us, like, this is what it actually looks like. So, an average prompt sent to ChatGPT in 2025, so maybe it's slightly outdated and it depends on which model you're using and all of that.
That's what you got.
It was 0.3 watt hours, which was approximately the amount of energy used by running a microwave for 1 second. So,
wow. Okay.
Getting people to stop using AI would be, there's a blogger who, like, pulled these numbers together, and then he was interviewed by the New York Times, so I think he's an actual reputable source. He's not, like, connected to the AI labs or anything in any way, but was saying that if we got the entire world to stop using generative AI, that would the decrease in energy use would be about the same as getting everybody in the world to use the microwave, like, something like 30 seconds less on every day. It's like this is, we are freaking out about a thing that we accept in other areas of our life, in terms of the energy use. Now, water use is a whole other thing. There are some, like, misquotes of the actual numbers. To my knowledge, it is a smaller issue than people tend to think it is by reading headlines on social media. I won't go further because I will misquote some things.
Right. But then also sort of begs the Greg Boyle question, which is, well, where can we roll up our sleeves and help? And so we're sort of running up to the top of our hour together. What else? Is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to say or that you'd like to talk about?
I think the jobs question is a really important one.
Yeah, say more about that.
And, well, so, I've been, I work with, on the side of my parish gig, I do some work with TriTank, which is an innovation hub out of Virginia Theological Seminary around AI stuff. And one of the conversations we've been having is like, how can the church be a source of, helping people through navigate this transition? And because AI is going to demand, such a huge transition for all of us as we adjust to this new and rapidly improving technology. And, if the church could be a place where people could learn from, help each other out and learn how to adjust and learn new skills or jobs training and things like that. That seems kind of like wildly radical to imagine the church doing that. But we can always dream big.
Right.
But I also ask
right in our wheelhouse.
Right. But then also, if you can say where there's a will, there's a way, but also there has to be a will. And right now,
Amen.
I'm not hearing much of a will in the church to engage constructively with AI. So I am interested in the jobs question. I think the church should be addressing this and thinking about how do we take care of our people who have served the church for many years, who maybe they're administrators, maybe they're communications people, and it's those types of jobs which are rapidly becoming more automatable. It's the more relational, spiritual jobs, typically the clergy jobs, which are less likely to be automated. I mean, nobody's going to have a robot do any sacraments for sure. So, I know I have some job security.
Write down the date and the time that you said that. Yeah.
But I do worry about how the church can take care of its people if we live in a world where a few years from now, maybe admins aren't needed for churches or needed for fewer hours than before, or thinking about how those jobs can shift to be about a different bundle of tasks so that they are using AI and they're also doing new things that they weren't doing before because AI frees them up to do that, and maybe serving the church even more, effectively than before. And I imagine there are some pretty amazing things that could come of that. But we have to be thinking creatively about this. We have to, my hope is that the church does not sit around and wait until everybody else figures it out and then follow. Because we've done that before, and I just don't think it works out well for us.
No.
Or anybody. It doesn't work out well for anybody when the church is a follower and not a leader.
No, because we ended up following some pretty questionable stuff.
Yep, sure.
So, Peter, what are you working on right now, and where can people find your work? And talk about the book coming out.
Sure, thank you. I have this book on collaborative sermons coming out on August 4th. It's about living stories sermons, the method that I talked about earlier, but it's also a more general pitch to trust the Spirit to show up in the sermon, to trust your people, and to trust Scripture, that sermons could be more collaborative. And that could take many different forms, whether that's living story sermons or not. and we're often not used to the idea of a collaborative sermon. So that's that book. And then I'm writing more specifically about AI currently on a Substack called The Human Part, because it's about the human part of ministry.
You're fuzzing a little bit
world.
there. Can you repeat the last sentence?
Okay, sure. I'm on a Substack called The Human Part, where I write about the human part of ministry in an AI world. And I do also plan to begin working on a book about AI and ministry, sharing a lot of these ideas that we've just been sharing. And that I have a contract with Church Publishing, so it'll be coming out maybe in August 2027 if I get my act together. But so look for all those things. The Human Part on Substack, and collaborative sermons from Church Publishing.
Okay, well, and then always my last question, what is giving you joy and sustenance right now? I hope something.
Well, I have a 3-year-old who is, the biggest joy in my life when he wants to be. And that's a big when he wants to be. And he just loves being a little goofball and running around, and telling stories with him is just a lot of fun. So there's that. And then just, living stories is also a big source of joy for me. And being surprised in sermons when I'm the preacher is a lot of fun. And just showing up and not knowing where the conversation is going to head, and then consistently being surprised by the richness and depth that people bring to the conversation.
That's great. Well, Peter Levenstrong, thank you so much for being on Mutual Aid.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
Thank you for sharing this time with Peter and me. You can read more from Peter on his Substack, The Human Part, at thehumanpart, that's all one word, .substack.com. You can learn more about Living Stories at Living Stories Sermons, again, all one word, livingstoriessermons.org. And that's also where you can pre-order his book. And you can find all sorts of resources at aichurchtoolkit.com. That's right, all one word, aichurchtoolkit.com, including the first season of his podcast. If you like this podcast, please give it a good rating and share it with your friends. As always, if you have ideas of people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like me to cover, email me at mkinman, that's MKINMAN, @gmail.com. Until next time, keep listening to each other, caring for each other, and loving each other and yourself. Bye.